Erev Tov, everyone. Good evening. I'm sorry for the brief technical difficulty. It had to do something with my computer, which shut off right when we began. This week's Parsha, of course, is Parshat Toldos, and I want to dedicate this shir in memory of my beloved father-in-law, God Yehuda ben Shlomo Zalman. This is his 19th yortzeit. He passed away 20 years ago. Our memory of him and his goodness and his pure neshama is still with us, and I'm sure will always be with us. So may his memory be a blessing for him and also for us. Well, Toldot, of course, records the birth of Yitzchak and of Yaakov and Esav, that they're very, very divergent personalities. Yaakov's personality being one of desire for inner growth, and Esav being a person of exceptional abilities, physical abilities, and others. They literally went different ways. And it should be noted before we get into the essence of our story that in a very rare instance, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch mentions that he believes that the growth of, or shall we say, the departure of Esav from the camp of Torah and Judaism as we know it actually has its roots in the parenting of Yitzchak and Rivka. His supposition is, Rav Hirsch, and this is Rav Hirsch, Myers certainly could not say this, is that they made a very primary parental mistake. They wanted both boys to be the same. And when they saw in Yaakov a love of intellectual growth, a love of spiritual growth, they improperly directed Esav to be the same as Yaakov. And Rav Hirsch mentions, although again today this is not the focus of this shir today, but Rav Hirsch mentions that the primary objective of parents is to be able to identify the strengths and the beauty that is both latent and obvious in each child and stress those. He says the goal of parenting is, he said, the same for all children, and that is to bring them to a lofty spiritual level. But how to get there requires the parents to recognize the internal strengths and the weaknesses of each child. And Rav Hirsch said that had they looked at Esav and his tremendous abilities, physical abilities, outwardly directed individual, and recognized it and validated it, life might have been different. Well, that's Rav Hirsch. And Rav Hirsch is certainly not a person who seeks to find the wrong in the avot and imahot, but in this instance, he feels that they made a mistake. But what we're going to do now is to go toward the end of the parsha, Perek Kaf Zayin, chapter 27. This is after various incidents, the incident of the selling of the birthright, which we're not going to talk about today, and the incident of the trouble that Yitzchak had with the Philistines and the covering up of the wells that Avram Avinu had constructed and had dug for the purpose of benefiting everybody. If you recall, I said that Avram Avinu really had a four-part plan. He was not just a destroyer of idols, an iconoclast, but he wanted to do things positively. A very important lesson for our people today, very important lesson. for us, for those of us who live now in this very, shall we say, contentious time. He cut down the idols, but then he realized he had to build. So we find that in Parshat Lech Lecha, he stressed the home through the ohel, through the tent. He redirected the fires from being of technology which had gone awry in the Tower of Babel. He redirected the fires to the fires of the Mizbeach, the fires of the altar. And then we find in the next parsha, Avram Avinu, third part of his plan was the Eshel. He built he planted a tree. It simply said he planted a tree in Beersheba, but he used that tree, and of course it could well be an orchard from which he got wood and got fruit. He used the tree itself, both in concept and in its actual existence, to bring people closer to God in one of three ways: intellectually, by pondering the purposefulness of the tree, as with all of organic life, and secondly, he built an inn so that people could enjoy the social life of the inn together, and working with Avram Avinu to learn about God. And finally, through Chesed, the wayfarers were given food and sustenance. And so those are the three ways that people can come to God. They can come to God through the inclusiveness in the group, through socialization, through the chesed and we have, thank God, many chesed organizations, and also through the pondering the tree and organic life and its purposefulness. They begin to see that there is a creator. So the fourth stage, though, is actually alluded to in this week's parsha, and that was Avram Avinu now branched out. He actually dug wells for the benefit of everyone in the area, the Plishtim, the Philistines, and those who were theists and people who believed in God, and those who didn't, all could benefit from the wells that Avram built. So that was the fourth area, to benefit society as a whole. But now we're going to turn to chapter 27, and we're going to look at verse 23, I believe it is. Yes. Okay, we're going to see in verse 20, actually it's 23, 24, 25. These verses, we see that Rivka realizes, and Yitzchak realizes, that he's coming to the end of his life. He wants to bless his son, Esau, to become the Bechor. Now, Esau has already sold his rights to be the firstborn way back at the beginning of the Parsha. He also has demonstrated over the course of time that he was not fit to take on that exalted position. Rivka knew it, and therefore she sought, because of Yitzchak's very poor eyesight, she sought to actually fool him into thinking he was blessing Esau when he was really blessing Yaakov. Yaakov reluctantly went along with this particular plot. And I want to focus on not so much on the morality of it, which maybe we'll do at another time, but I want to focus on some psukim that we have here that just precede and follow the blessing that Yaakov bestows. He thinks he's bestowing on Esau, but it's really bestowing it upon Yaakov. Now, in Pasuk of Gimel, Yaakov had just come to Esau and said to Yitzchak, and said to him that he is Esau b'chorecha, I am Esau, your firstborn. Chazal divided to say, I am who I am, and Esav is your firstborn. Shall we say, the credibility of that interpretation is up to the reader. But the Torah tells us in Pasuk Kaf Gimel 23, below Ikiro, Yitzchak did not recognize Yaakov for being Yaakov. Ki hayu yadav kidei Esav. He had already put on the skins and of sheep, and it was rough like Esav, and he thought that he was actually Esav. And then the Torah tells us Vayavarachehu, and he blessed him. Now, really, the question is, does he bless him in that pasuk, or does later on in pasuk Kav Zayin we see again Vayavarachehu? Is it two separate blessings? One blessing? What does it mean? So let's take a look now. After Yitzchak asks Yaakov, even though he thinks it's Esav, to draw near, he says as follows. The Torah tells us, Vayigash vayishaklo. And Yaakov approached Yitzchak in accordance with Yitzchak's wish, and he kissed him. Vayarach et reach begadav. And he smelled the fragrance of the clothes. Vayavarachehu. Once again, it says that Yitzchak then blessed Yaakov, still mistakenly thinking that it's Esau. Vayomer. And then Yitzchak said, Re'eh reach bani. The simple interpretation of this is, look, the fragrance of my son, Kareach hasadeh, is like the fragrance of the field, Asher beracho Hashem, which God has blessed. Now, the Meforshim say that, let's look at one more pasuk further, and then we'll see the problem. And then it appears that Yitzchak is now giving the blessing. V'yiten lecha Elohim, and may God bestow or grant to you. But notice it says v'yiten, and let God, and may He give to you, and which means that we're in the middle of something. What is it that preceded this? The Yiten Lecho Elohim mitala shemayim, may God give you of the dew of the heavens, umishmanei haaretz, and from the fat of the land, the rov dagan v'tirosh, and the multitude of grain and wine. He goes on to bless him further, but we're going to focus on these psukim themselves because they are problematic in trying to understand. Now, if we look back at Pasuk Kav Zayin, Vayigash vayishaklo, he approached and he kissed him. That apparently probably kissed each other. The Torah, once again, you have a pronominal ambiguity. You don't know exactly who kissed whom, but that's not terribly difficult. We can live with either of those possibilities or both. Vayorach et reach begadav. And then Yitzchak smells the fragrance of his clothing, meaning to say, Yaakov, the clothing Yaakov was wearing, this subterfuge to make him believe that he has just come from the field, Vayavarachehu, and he blessed him. Now, the question is, it says he blessed him, but it doesn't tell us what the blessing is. So most Meforshim say that Yitzchak was eager to bless his sons, but particularly Esav at this point, with the very same blessing that his father Avram got, the blessing of the land and the blessing of children. That's what he was looking for. But then it says, Vayomer, right in the same pasuk, he blessed him and he said. Now, is what he's going to say a part of the blessing? And if so, Vayomer re'eh, look, that the fragrance of my son is like the fragrance of the field which God has blessed. The word re'eh is also strange. Look, who's he talking to? It appears that it's just it's the father and the son in the same tent at the same time. Re'eh, Who is he speaking to when he says Re'eh? This is what we're going to explore now. It appears from the Meforshim that Vayivorcheu means he then gave him the substance of the bracha that Avraham had received from Hashem. That in fact, Vayivorcheu, and he blessed him. Okay, and he gave the same blessing essentially that God gave to Avraham. But the idea of Re'eh Reach Bani, who is he talking to? Now, the Hamigdavar, who was the Netziv, who was the great Rosh Hashiva of Volozhin in the latter part of the 19th century, said that that Re'eh here is a prayer. He's actually Yitzchak is actually turning to Hashem, and he says, Re'eh, Hashem, look upon Reach Bani, the fragrance of my son, Kireach Sadeh, may it be like the fragrance of the field, Asher Beracho Hashem. So in other words, it's not saying, oh, look at this is the same fragrance. He's saying it's a prayer that he says to God, whether he says it verbally or he says it internally. Yitzchak says, Hashem, look, Re'eh, please look at my child, and consider this fragrance of my son like the fragrance of the field, Asher Beracho Hashem. Now, of course, the difficulty with that is, if he's talking to Hashem, the last three words seem to be strange. Asher Beracho Hashem, that Hashem is blessed, but he's talking to Hashem, according to this. But nevertheless, that's the Netziv's view. And he says that throughout history, Yaakov Avinu, Yitzchak Avinu, is privy to the Jewish future. And he knows that Jews are a giving and good people. That's what he can see, that basically we are good people. Doesn't mean there are not difficult people, and we're going to see that in just a moment. But Yitzchak asks God to accept the chesed of to accept the chesed of Jews who give their tzedakah without doing it for necessarily for the right reasons. They give it because the people give tzedakah, but not because of the mitzvah that is there. So here, Yitzchak says, Hashem, our people, my children, my grandchildren, and my descendants, they are going to be a very generous people. And by the way, that's borne out. That is borne out when we look at the tzedakah that people give and groups give throughout America. Jews are always or at the very least, among the most generous of all people. But not every Jew gives because it's a mitzvah. Many of them give because that's what a person does. So according to this, the Netziv, who probably knew there was a lot of turmoil in the 19th century, the Netziv says, Hashem, I know there are people who are going to give for not necessarily the wrong reasons, but not for the right reason. But attribute to them the Reach Sadeh, the fragrance of the Beit like at the Beit HaMikdash. Sadeh is oftentimes seen by Chazal as a catchword for the Beit HaMikdash. And Asher Beracho Hashem is that Beit HaMikdash which God has blessed. So that's what the Netziv says. It's a prayer. It's a prayer. Now, the Baal Katav Kabbalah, who is Rabbi Yaakov Mecklenburg, who was a contemporary of the Netziv, uses a very, very creative statement. He says, Re'eh here does not mean see at all. It means choose. So you'll say, what, all of a sudden it means choose? No, believe it or not, this shoresh in more than one place indicates choice. And so therefore, for example, the way we can see it it's most evident at the Akedah, where Hashem calls the Har Moriah, Mount Moriah, Hashem Yireh. God will choose. So it means to choose, and Yosef also uses this term, which appears to mean seed, but here it means choose. So he says, Re'ei reach bani kereach sadeh asher beracho Hashem. He says, may all the people that come from me, you, starting with you, and all who follow, choose that the fragrance that you emit, namely the chesed that you do, the kindness and the goodness that you do, should be done kareach hasadeh. May it be done in the fulfillment of the mitzvah that we have not only in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, but also, of course, at any time. So the Kitab of Kabbalah says the following. He says something, he was a tremendous analyst. So he said, fragrance comes from one of two sources. Fragrance comes from one of two sources. Either it is intrinsic fragrance, or it is actually secondary. So, for example, if a person walks into a florist shop, the fragrance of the flowers are intrinsic. But if you're there long enough, some of that rubs off on you, okay? And that you actually have, for a short period of time, have the fragrance of the flowers which are there. So the Ktav of Kabbalah says, may it be that the fragrance that you emit is intrinsic. In other words, coming from your own essence, from you, starting with Yaakov or Esav, and going throughout history, that the fragrance should not be something which is secondary, but it should be something which is primary. He also says that we know that bad fragrance is given off by flowers that are dying, and good fragrance is given up by things that are in the in literally the heart and the flower of their life. Those are good fragrances. So this is his bracha, that the fragrance should be a primary fragrance. It should be a part of your personality, not because you're doing it for some external reason. Okay. Now, the Kli Yakar asks about this pasuk, the next one, Kafchet, V'yiten lecha Elohim. Rashi also asks, he starts with a vav, and may he give to you. Well, wait a minute. Where was the first half of the bracha? Where is it? It says, he said, I smell the fragrance of my son is like the fragrance of the field. And then he says, and may God give you. What does and mean? It's starting in the middle. So the Kli Yakar, who was a 17th century, very wonderful, great commentator, made the following observation. He said, when a person is born, they are the beneficiary of God's kindness from the second they take their first breath, all the way to the time that they become, shall we say, a bar or bat mitzvah. All of that is credit extended to the person. And I never thought of it that way, but I think it's probably true. Children don't earn anything in the first years of their life. They're mainly preoccupied with enjoying life and being sustained. But nevertheless, says the Kli Yakar, God extends his benefits and his kindness to the person. Therefore, when he said it's a lot like a business person. If you have a business person who extends credit, whether it's a credit company or maybe it's a small grocery store. So a person comes along and they need credit, so you give them credit. But what happens if on the appointed day that they're supposed to pay, they don't? And another week goes by or another month. And then he comes and says, and then maybe he'll pay, maybe he won't. And he'll say, could you extend me more credit? It's understandable that the business person can say, I can't extend you any more credit. I'm not going to do that. First, you have to pay up. then we'll talk about extending credit. So in a sense, the Kli Yakar says everybody who is born is extended God's credit. And there's no way that we can pay back all of the things that we have received as beneficiaries of Hashem's kindness and goodness. But nevertheless, Yitzchak in his prayer says, the yitain, the vav there means and, meaning in addition to what you've been given until now, and maybe none of us has paid back, may God nevertheless grant you extended credit as we hopefully assume our responsibilities. I want to finish with two things. Number one, the Gemara in Sanhedrin talks about Reb Zera. And the Gemara says that when the Torah talks about Reach Bigadav, when Yitzchak smelled the fragrance of the clothing of Yaakov, who was pretending to be Esav, that word Bigadav, Beged, also has the same root as those who are negligent or betrayal. So the Gemara says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way it's expressed is Vayarach et Reach Begadav. Don't read, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, don't limit your reading to the fragrance of his clothing, but Ella Bogdav. And you should see the fragrance, not always nice, of Bogdav, of those who are negligent or uncaring. Try to grant to them, Hashem, even though the Jews themselves are not always faithful to both in terms of faith and in terms of behavior to what your standards and what you want. Nevertheless, Yitzchak asks that they be granted these bogdim, these people who either they betray their responsibilities as Jews and they betray or they're negligent in their behavior. So please look at them as if they are people who are willing to change. Now, the Gemara tells us that Reb Zera, who was one of the great Amoraim, had lived in a rough and tumble neighborhood. And these guys were ruffians. There were a bunch of them. They weren't very nice people. But what did the Reb Zera do? He befriended them. He sought to befriend them, even though they were bogdim, even though they themselves had betrayed their Jewish faith and betrayed their behavior. He nevertheless extended his love to them. And it says, the Gemara says, the rabbis weren't all that happy. They felt that somewhere along the line, these people need to know that what they're doing and what they've done is unacceptable. And the Gemara tells us that when Reb Zera died, these people whom he had befriended turned over a new leaf. They said to themselves, who is going to be our advocate now? We weren't good. We did things that were absolutely wrong. We're on the path to try to become better. Now that Reb Zera is gone, who will be our advocate? Who will care about us? And then, of course, the Gemara tells us that this very group of ruffians became Balei Tshuva. One last thing, I just want to take a moment. Starting with a vav, starting with and, one of the great poets of early Hebrew in the 20th century was a woman by the name of Rachel HaMeshoreret. She wrote one of the most famous poems in the last 100 years. Many of us know it as a song, Kineret Sheli, but she didn't name it Kineret Sheli. She began her poem simply with the word ve'ulai, and maybe. Ve'ulai lo hayu hadvarim me'olam. Maybe my coming to Eretz Israel, and she thought back on literally on the field that she was on in the Galilee, right near the Yam Kinneret, and she had such magnificent times there. She was so inspired, not just fun, but inspired as a person who wanted to live a spiritual life. She was not necessarily observant, but she was spiritual. And she looks back, sadly, she's on her deathbed. She died at a young age, at age 40, Rachel, the poet. And she wrote a poem, Ve'ulai, and maybe, Lo hayu advarim me'olam. That vav is the subject of a lot of discussion, but to me, I can picture this person who had spent her life living out her dream in Eretz Yisrael and being able to remember so fondly the days and the evenings that she shared with her fellow workers who were working the land and who worked together. She must have been at that point pensive, looking out the window, and she begins by saying, and her thought precedes it, and she says, and maybe. And that maybe is, I think, what we have to remember too. We have to be able to look back on our lives and to be able to see what we can about what we've done, and to be proud, hopefully, of much of what we've done, but to be able to look back and say, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just a dream. But now, at this point, each of us can say, I want to realize that dream. And that's the focus of the Vav. So we'll wish everybody a good evening. And there will be a shir this coming Shabbat morning, essentially this year. And I want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye. Good evening.
Have a good Shabbos and a Chodesh Tov.
Amen. Oh, yeah. Chodesh Tov. Chodesh Tov to everybody.
Thank you. Good
Thank
Shabbos.
you.
You too.
Shabbos, everybody.
Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.